We'll now move on to Senator Carter with Senate Bill 73. Senator Carter, you're up.
Good evening, Chairman Smith, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, and members of the committee for hanging in there. This bill is last but not least. I submit to you it will hold your attention and not be anything but boring. I would like to bring up my panel, which consists of Elizabeth Hilliard, Dayvon Love, Yanet, Amanuel, and that's all that I was given. But if Ms. Debra Ramsey, yes, absolutely, welcome to come up. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, over the last 10 years or so, every discussion, debate, bill, work group that we've had, when we grappled with this issue of marijuana legalization, at the forefront of those issues were a couple of different concepts. The pervasive arguments were that the racial disparities in arrest and prosecutions were such that we had to do something about marijuana. And so we started with the decriminalization of the small amount, and now, of course, the Marylanders have voted, and we will now be legalizing marijuana. Another pervasive argument is that not only are these arrests, are the racial disparities so prevalent that we have to do something about it, but that making these arrests and wasting police resources on them and all the processing and all of that was really a detriment because law enforcement was not freed up to deal with more serious crime. That was all part of the argument and debate, even when some of our members tried to persuade me last year to vote for the referendum because I was skeptical, because I was very afraid that if we didn't do it all at once, there would still be injustice and equity in what we wound up doing in our ultimate product. And so I'm praying and hoping that that's not true. And one of those things we have to do is really address the issue of criminalization, and we have to do it this year. So with that being said, I want to point out some examples of why we have to do it, why even with the decriminalization, we've still had incredible disparity in the way that laws are enforced with regard to marijuana. Between 2018 and 2019, 76% of Marylanders arrested for possessing more than 10 grams of marijuana were black, despite the fact that only 30% of the state's population is black. From 2018 to 2019, 75% of those arrested for possession in Maryland were black people. Black people are 8 times more likely to be arrested for marijuana in Queen Anne's County, 6 times more likely in Carroll, Cecil, and Frederick counties, 5 times more likely in Allegheny County. These statistics clearly demonstrate that Maryland's black population is disproportionately more likely to be arrested and criminally convicted for possession of cannabis than their white counterparts. The criminalization of cannabis and the selective enforcement of the law has perpetuated a false perception that cannabis use and possession by people of color is indicative of criminal activity, whereas the cannabis use by whites is viewed as recreational or medicinal. As you must agree, more legislation is needed. This is our opportunity, and so all this bill does is eliminate criminal penalties for both possession and possession with intent to distribute and impose civil penalties instead. It's a very basic concept. I'd like for you to hear from the entire panel. Everybody brings a different perspective, and then I'd answer questions if desired. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Smith, Vice Chair Waldstreicher, members of the committee. My name is Yanet Amanuel, Public Policy Director with the ACLU of Maryland, here in support of SB 73. In 2014, the General Assembly decriminalized the possession of 10 grams or less of marijuana, in large part because of the disparate enforcement of marijuana laws on black people. Similarly, this last November, Maryland voters decided that the recreational use of marijuana should no longer be criminalized. However, simply legalizing will not fix this issue. Criminal penalties for marijuana-related offenses are still on the books. Under the current law, possession over the civil use amount and possession with intent to distribute are misdemeanor offenses and carries a penalty of 6 months to 3 years of incarceration. A criminal record can and does create a barrier to employment for many Marylanders. A misdemeanor conviction also hinders individuals' access to stable housing and a range of public benefits. Additionally, a misdemeanor conviction record may bar individuals from residing at certain homes and exclude individuals from low-income utility payment plans and food stamps. With higher conviction rates, persons of color bear the brunt of collateral consequences stemming from misdemeanor convictions. Exclusion from the job market, stable housing, and countless other crucial services perpetuate the cycle of imprisonment plaguing communities of color. Without gainful employment and stable housing, individuals are forced to livelihoods of criminality. Last year, the Maryland State Commission on Criminal Sentencing Policy released data on the sentencing trends in Maryland Circuit Courts for marijuana offenses. The report revealed that between 2017 to 2021, Black people made up almost 68% of the people sentenced with misdemeanor and felony offenses. Black people also served longer time for these offenses, and for almost 50% of the people sentenced, this was their first offense. Continuing to criminalize these offenses will have zero benefit to public safety, especially because the majority of those currently selling marijuana are substance dealers selling to survive. They do not make substantial profit and will not have access to the license to distribute marijuana lawfully. It's unfair to continue to levy any kind of punishment against them when wealthy, mostly white Marylanders will be able to engage in the same conduct legally and for a profit. And so with that, I urge a favorable report on SB 73. Thank you.
All right, good evening. Excuse me. Good evening, committee. Dayvon Love, Director of Public Policy, Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, here in favor of SB 73. As we've heard, cannabis has been legalized in the state of Maryland. And one of the things that you'll likely hear from law enforcement, traditionally, they have opposed the idea of ridding criminal penalties as it relates to cannabis. Unfortunately, when we look at the way that cannabis prohibition has been used as a tool for law enforcement, has been largely ineffective. Information from the judiciary that looks at 2018 and 2019 in Baltimore City had almost 1,500 charges for cannabis-related arrests. It only led to 20 convictions. Yet in Prince George's County, almost a little bit over 2,700 charges for cannabis possession, only 30 arrests. So clearly, the use of cannabis prohibition and charging it as a public safety strategy is ineffective. Particularly when we look at the clearance rates, those are two of the blackest jurisdictions in the state of Maryland, and we look historically at the low clearance rates. So clearly the use of cannabis prohibition policies are not effective as it relates to public safety. Additionally, the Director of the Mayor's Office of Safety and Neighborhood Engagement, Shante Jackson, came before your committee on January 17th. And she actually, in one of the slides, it demonstrates that they looked at in the Western District, which we think is representative of Baltimore City, a good sample size, where it says that only 14.5 or 6% of the homicides committed in that district were related to drug use, or illicit drug trafficking, rather. When you look at things like ongoing personal disputes, internal group disputes, subtle personal disputes, robbery, these things actually account for a larger percentage of the violence that exists in Baltimore City, particularly in the Western District. So it's really important that when law enforcement says that they need cannabis prohibition policies for public safety, that argument has very little merit. The thing that I will end on, I think it's really important, we look at California, when it legalized, we know one of the things that people in California recognize is that many of the big companies that benefited in an attempt to get rid of the black market actually went after the illegal possession of cannabis even more strongly, which exacerbated many of the racial disparities in cannabis prohibition policy. So we don't want that to happen here in Maryland. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and happy Black History Month to all. My name is Debra Ramsey. I am a former Baltimore City Police detective with the Criminal Investigation Division, Drug Enforcement Section, Internal Investigation Division, Uniform Patrol, and Community Policing. I'm here representing myself, and I'm also a member of the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. That is a nonprofit that is comprised of retired judges, attorneys, police officers, for the sole mission of bringing community and police officers in a more healthier space. I am in support of this bill. Why, do you ask? Well, when you look at today's climate, the least amount of interaction police will have with citizens is better for all, including police. It's a safety issue. A couple of months ago, 2/3 of Marylanders voted to legalize marijuana. Criminal records in lieu of civil resolutions, it has oftentimes put people who look like me in a caste system. And what does that look like? Our trajectory to uplift ourselves and to have more economic power can be thwarted. I heard you say earlier that at 11 years old you had a dust up. Well, young black boys, they don't have dust up. They have juvenile records. They become juvenile delinquents and in need of supervision. Yes, yes. So what I'm just saying is that this bill will help eliminate that and lift that cloud off of being economically straddled. I also heard today we talk about recruitment. Oftentimes recruitment gets into recruitment managers and recruitment officers. There's a bottleneck there, and I think we all need to take a look at that. And lastly, I would just like to say that the budget that we talked about earlier about not having enough employees for the state of Maryland, this could very well be able to open up that gateway to have more available Maryland State residents to fill those positions. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair, Vice Chair, members of the committee. I did warn you all last week you would be sick of my voice by April. I will fulfill that promise. I will not repeat anything that my prior panelists have said, but I will emphasize 2 points. One, there are very few convictions being pursued under this statute because it does not make sense to penalize someone criminally, subject them to the collateral consequences, subject them to jail time, possibly cause them to lose a job, as we talked about, a state job, a city job, a county job that they are otherwise well qualified for, in light of Marylanders' strong support, over 60%, 67%, I believe, who think that we should be legalizing cannabis. It is not logical to continue to punish people in one section when we are encouraging economic prosperity in another section. Taking these cases and taking these charges and moving them into the criminal section where we can impose fines, we can impose fees, and we can impose community service without any of the potential negative collateral consequences is the only smart way to move forward as we continue to improve and legalize our cannabis use in Maryland. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Questions from the committee? All right, seeing none, thank you all very much. I think we have one more witness. Is Rusty Carr here? All right.
Hello, my name is Rusty Carr. I'm a current medical patient and a concerned citizen. I'm here today to offer support with amendments for SB 73. The first thing I noticed is that the penalty for possession for 18 to 21-year-olds includes things like an option for drug treatment. I would suggest you add an option for allowing such a person to get a medical card certification in lieu of a drug treatment program. The second observation I have is that the penalty for exceeding the cultivation limit, plant limit, is too low to prevent black market cultivation, but also too high for home growers who just go one plant over the limit. So if the limit's going to be 2 plants and somebody grows a third plant, the current law says they should go to jail. And I think that's a problem. But taking the jail penalty off, the penalty I think is still $3,000 as a max. And that seems awful high for one plant. So I would suggest that that's an issue to look at. In my written testimony, I have a suggestion to do a canopy limit instead of a plant count limit, and to tailor the penalties that way. I also, in my written testimony, submitted suggestions for home grow. I realize that we don't have the full legalization bill, so I put that information in there in case we don't get a full legalization bill. So I would ask you to take a look at the home grow assessments. I assume Senator Carter may be interested in that. And I thank you for having me tonight, and I wish you a good evening. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. We have one question, Senator Folden.
Actually, my question was for Senator Carter.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Actually, Senator Carter, if you want to take the podium, I don't know if you're. Thank you.
In an effort to save time, I'll just keep talking while you're walking. Thank you. That's fine. You were talking about the prosecution rates on those that were arrested. So your rates were really low. In what districts were you, what did you reference that there was such a disparity in arrest versus prosecution?
I don't think I talked about arrest versus prosecution.
You
Oh, wait a
talked
minute.
about like, there was like, however many, 1,800 and only 30 were prosecuted?
30% of the state's population is black, but
Oh, that was you? Oh, sorry.
76% arrested.
So, I'm sorry, I missed, so,
Okay.
and what I wanted to ask you was, your statistics that you gave for the percentages, the ratios of the statistical data you gave for the potential for being arrested, where did you get that versus other?
Probably
Because you
from
did
the
it
same
across the
source from a
state.
report from the ACLU
Oh, okay, thank you.
of Maryland.
Okay, and I'll just ask the gentleman behind you, I'm sorry, the other question. Where did you get the, I apologize, sir, I don't remember, I don't have,
Yeah, there was a request made to the judiciary for those numbers, so. we
and
can
of
supply you
which
with-
area? Like which
It's the
district?
entire state. So it gave, the judiciary submitted information about the charges for cannabis possession and convictions.
Did we have how many of those that were charged in Baltimore when it was
Yeah,
illegal?
it separates it out by jurisdiction.
Okay, but of your numbers that you provided, you did an overall snapshot of all
So
that
in
combined?
In Baltimore City, in combined, 2018 and 2019.
In Baltimore City?
Baltimore City,
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
right. And then Prince George's County, combined 2018, 2019, a little over 2,700 folks charged for cannabis possession.
And how many were?
It was
you
about
s-
only 30 convictions.
Does that have anything to do with the responsibility of the state's attorney and their unwillingness to prosecute these type of crimes?
Well, I mean,
That conviction rate?
well, I mean, if you think about when the state's attorney announced that, it was announced on the heels of, during that period of time.
I understand.
So that's one piece. I think the other piece, though, is that the point that I'm making is that law enforcement has traditionally been reliant on cannabis prohibition policies as an approach to law enforcement. And I think the argument generally is that that's not been effective at
Yeah.
addressing public safety.
So my response to that is that when all sides and responsibility parties that are involved in the judicial process, from the arrest, prosecution, and then the disposition,
Understand
when they don't work and fulfill their duties that they took when they raised their hand and to say that they would uphold the Constitution and the laws of the state of Maryland, that causes a problem. And so it leads to these type of problems that we're having, because I'm all about, look, I understand the laws change, but you got to enforce and you got to do the laws that are on the books. So I appreciate you coming up. I'm just going to leave it at that. But we all have a responsibility, and we fail to do that. We create a problem for the law enforcers, because now they're put in a bad position because it's still a violation of law. But when it's not prosecuted and they're doing their due diligence, it creates these whole other realm of issues, and then the data can be turned to support such a measure.
Well, Senator, just two things quickly. One is that while you mentioned Baltimore City, Prince George's County similarly didn't have that same policy, and there was still, in fact, most of the biggest county that
Yeah.
charged was Prince George's County,
Yeah.
majority black district. Secondly, the point that I want to make to you is that you're making a claim about, whether or not, people fulfilled their duty. My point is that I think it's the prerogative of those in law enforcement that find cannabis prohibition policies as effective law enforcement tools to demonstrate its effectiveness. And my argument is that they've not been able to demonstrate its effectiveness.
I appreciate that.
Thank you.
We'll agree to disagree.
Yes,
Have
sir.
a good day.
All right, with that, that'll conclude the testimony and the hearing for Senate Bill 73 and our hearings for the evening. Thank you all for hanging in there with us. We are done.